let's change the tune just a little bit, Garrett. On that somewhat somber note, we'll talk about a little bit more disappointing teams to close it out. And this is not teams that had to fire their coach or teams that we expect to be towards the bottom. This is 4 teams that really we're not sure what happened this year. Maybe we can paint a picture for some of them, but in the preseason, we were expecting them to be contenders for the college football playoff, and they just fell off for one reason or another. We'll start with Texas State, and it feels harsh to call a team that had never been to a bowl game before 2023 and got back to a bowl game in 2024 a disappointment for getting to and winning a bowl game, but man, we were pushing for a Sun Belt title on the show. A lot of other shows were as well. Obviously, Jordan McLeod coming over from James Madison was a huge boost. You get the Sun Belt Player of the Year on your team. You should expect to compete for the conference title. And they were in most of the games that they played, but that defense just really held them back. The offense was humming, but the next step for Coach Kinney in San Marcos is figuring out the defense and finding a way to get some more talent on that side of the ball.
Yeah, it just wasn't the year that they expected to have. It just wasn't the year that I think any of us expected them to have, and I think that's kind of the big point there is just to say, like, some of these G5 teams that looks good on paper, right? And it's a lot of transfers that are coming in that had success at a previous location, and they're doing fine there, but it just didn't really work out the way they wanted it to. Again, the offense was great, just man, that defense was pretty tough. And that's a team too that like took playoff contender Arizona State to the wire.
Yeah.
And like they took a playoff team that made a run and looked really good through the year. They took them down to the wire, and it took some real heroics out of Scadaboo to win that game for them. So it's a really weird situation with that team where you really saw some flashes of brilliance this year, and it just did not materialize over the course of the season.
Yeah, and like I said, the margin for error is so thin in the G5, like the difference and the talent disparity in those mid-level teams, right? Like you can throw them in a blender most years and come out with any random order, and you're probably going to be closer than trying to predict it in the preseason because the margin is just so thin. So if one side of the ball is just severely lacking like it was for the Bobcats this year, it's going to result in more losses than it should have, and the sum's going to be a little bit less than the parts, especially when you look at the offensive side of the ball. Speaking of the sum being less than the parts, Liberty, woof. Guys, this is not harsh to put the Flames, who had the worst strength of schedule in all of college football, and still found a way to lose 4 games. I feel like every time towards the end of the season I was turning on Tuesday night CUSA action, they're losing. They're playing with their food in the best case, and they're losing in the worst case to teams that are just infinitely less talented than them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't even know what to say about Liberty season. This is a team that I think obviously we expected a lot out of them, but it seemed fair. Like it seemed fair to expect a lot out of them because they had shown us that they could handle that. Again, just didn't materialize.
Yeah, pulling up that schedule to just hammer home my point.
Mm-hmm.
Down the stretch, they just could not be counted on either side of the ball. Really, Caden Salter, obviously a great player, but starting 5-0, they get upset at Kennesaw State. I believe that was Kennesaw State's first or second win as an FBS program.
I think that was the first. I think it was a big deal.
Yeah, it was a massive deal. They stormed the field
on that one. I think
they absolutely rushed the field because I think Liberty was ranked at that point, if I remember correctly.
At 5-0,
they follow that up to losing to Jacksonville State. Now, Jacksonville State obviously won the conference, so you're not gonna poo-poo them too much for that one. But you go to Sam Houston to end the year, you get embarrassed by a team that threw for 83, typically could not throw for more than 100 yards on the year. And then you just don't show up in the bowl game. I know Salter was already gone at that point and opted out and was in the portal, but you don't show up against Buffalo and you get embarrassed in the Bahamas Bowl as well. It's a disappointing season for the Flames, and it felt like they kind of had something they felt like they were kind of breaking through to be potentially a G5 power. I mean, we were talking about how they definitely needed to schedule better to make sure that they were positioning themselves for the playoff. But yeah, Jamie Chadwell and company definitely need to do some soul searching as they try to replace a ton of
Yep.
talent in this offseason.
Yeah, I'm with you.
All right, cool. Let's keep going. We got two more.
I couldn't say it better.
Two more disappointing. And saying Jacksonville State did make me realize that I skipped over giving accolades to Ohio and Marshall, who won their conference but were not in contention for the playoff. Army won the American, obviously, too. But yeah, Tim Albin and his DC are heading to Charlotte, so definitely something to watch at Ohio. But they weathered a portal. I hesitate to even call it a storm. It was a hurricane this last offseason and found a way. That's a program that's used to winning at this point. So we'll see how they respond.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Marshall had to opt out of a bowl game because of the number of players that they had in the transfer portal. But such is life as a G5 program. You win your conference and you're still going to be really fighting that battle to keep your players and your coaches from moving on. Last two teams I want to talk about here, Garrett, South Florida and App State. South Florida had a brutal opening to their schedule. In their first 6 games, they faced Alabama, Miami, Memphis, and Tulane. And they went 0-4 in those games. And obviously losing to Alabama and Miami is very forgivable if you're South Florida, but you would have loved to see them beat at least one of those win one of those tough conference games to start off.
Well,
because especially since they were giving
good swings at them too.
Yeah, they were getting hyped as like one of the hot teams out of the American because of who they had on that roster. Quarterback play was really good coming into the season. It just didn't materialize for them.
They trailed Alabama by 5 points with 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter. They had them. They were right there. Obviously, you look at the final score, the wheels came off in those last 6 minutes. Bama rattles off 3 touchdowns to make it look like they did Bama things. They didn't do Bama things.
We watched that game all together, I think, and
we were all together
on the edge of our seats for a good chunk of it. Yeah,
almost the upset. And kind of a similar story for the Miami game as well. Not as late in the game, but I mean, they were leading that game up until there were like 2 minutes left in the half. So they were up in that game. They were kind of going back and forth with Miami. Miami obviously rattled off a whole bunch of points in the second half. And USF was done scoring when they hit 15. So that was that. But just not the year that I think a lot of us expected for them. Definitely not the year that they expected for themselves. Again, similar issues where the defense let them down. They were 33rd in scoring offense. They were 99th in scoring defense. You can't give up points like that and expect to win a whole bunch of games.
Yeah, Bryce Archie filled in admirably down the stretch. He did kind of right the ship a little bit, got them wins against some lower level teams in that conference, and they did pull out a epic win over San Jose State in the Hawaii Bowl. That was a really fun game to take in on Christmas Eve, but yeah, just not the conference title contender that we thought they were, and we figured that out really early on in the season, unfortunately. Last one we'll talk about here is App State, and they missed a bowl for the second time in 3 years, and that feels like a really crazy thing to say when you think about Joey Aguilar coming into the season being what we thought was probably going to be the best quarterback in G5 and pushing for one of the best quarterbacks in America. And man, did it just not materialize for App State. Obviously, the aftermath of Hurricane Helene definitely didn't help. That there were way more important things going on than figuring out a football team in Boone, North Carolina for portions of this year. But the cracks were showing well before that, right? Like they had the Liberty game canceled in late September, but before that, they had already lost by 46 to Clemson, barely beat East Carolina, and lost 48-14 to South Alabama in their conference opener. So the cracks were already showing, and this was just a team that by the end of the year seemed like they kept putting up fights. They were in a lot of the games, right? They lose close to Louisiana. They lose relatively close to Coastal Carolina. They lost by 9 in the finale when they're fighting for bowl eligibility at Georgia Southern. But this was just a team that never quite put it together, and it's really surprising to me.
Yeah, and it's a team that I think we've come to expect a lot out of, which should go to show you that this program has been built in a way that I think it is pretty long standing. But I think we now have to kind of ask those questions of like, hey, was that actually a good program, or were we just kind of on a good couple of years? And we'll see you again in a decade when you decide to upset another top team or something. There'll be a moment when you go out there and you go beat USC on the coast when they're ranked number 5 or something, and 6 or 7 years from now. But I don't think that's the case. I think they bounce back. I do think that there's better times ahead. Obviously, with the hurricane and everything else, that was tough to finish the year. Again, like you said, like more things to think about than football. But yeah, it was just a tough situation. So I think they'll bounce back. I will say this has one of those like Disney story type things to it where they could come on a crazy run next year just because of what their community needs and how much this could mean to the community and kind of the surrounding area. So I wouldn't be shocked if it has a little bit of Disney magic to it next year. But it's definitely a program to watch and monitor and see how they're going to respond this offseason going into next year.
Well, and the program has high expectations, right? They let Sean Clark go. They hire Dowell Logans away from South Carolina. He was their offensive coordinator. So
yeah.
Look for there to be a really fun offense in Boone with,
or at least a good QB run game if he's from South Carolina
with that pedigree. Absolutely. So
gracious him, Howard.